Hey everybody, this is John from Denarii Games. We got another devlog update this week. Last week we were working on our building manager and integrating it with the kit. And the task for this week was to make these buildings purchasable. So we ended up spending most of the week inside the kit building an add-on called Property Manager. I'll walk through the components of that a little bit later. But let's take a look at it in action. So the first thing we did, if you recall, is that we automatically populated the buildings database with the buildings based on placement inside of the editor. What we ended up adding was just stuffing in extra data, the extra data column, the price. We'll probably extend that out to include a couple other things too. But note these prices: 1,000, 1,200, 2,000 gold. Let's jump into the game. Alright, so we're in the game, and right now everything's kind of driven from the door. So if I click on the door entity, we'll see this new thing called Property Manager come up. I'll show another building entity, which is not a door. It's Workbench. Property Manager doesn't show up. So that's the first thing, is we're selectively showing this thing called a Property Manager on the property doors. So when we pull that up, it checks to see what the price is. So here it's saying it's $1,000 gold, excuse me. And if I move over to the next door, 2,000 and 1,200. So let's fix the gold problem. All right, just got paid. So let's open this door. Now we can purchase the building. So let's go ahead and say yes. And that's it, property purchased. So now when I go back into Property Manager, it says this building's owned by me. And of course I now have control over it. So let's refresh the database. And there we can see that the demo account now owns both the door, which purchased for 1,200, and the parent object as well. Jumping back in game, I can now do all the things I would normally do with the door as well as the property. So I can set the password, I can lock it, I can destroy the door, put in a different door, because I own the entire property. Let's open up a second client. Now if our second client comes in, she can see that the door is owned by demo. So let's take a look underneath the hood and see how we put this together. This will be a little bit longer than normal videos because I actually kind of want to walk through some of the code. So the first thing that we did, we kind of worked backwards, right? We worked backwards from the UI, and inside of the UI is something called the UI current building. So we just cloned that and made our changes to it. Of course, you'd have to replace the UI current building inside of your canvas gameplay with this new one. But inside of that, we just have now the Property Manager button. This in turn, it gets extended. You can see that it's pulling up UI current building. So we did a partial on that, which you can see here, UI current building Property Manager. Open up that code, and now we've added in the reference to the Property Manager button, and then we have the handler for the click on the Property Manager. One of the things that we had to do here was use devxt show method. So the underlying class has all of its logic on what to show or not on enable. Of course, we can't hook into that because we're partial. Normally I'd kind of override that thing, but this is a good example of using the devxt to get around it. So this is a show event that gets called, and I can do the same basic thing, whether or not to show the button or not. So from here, we can see we go into Show Property Manager. Show Property Manager is a partial on the base player character controller. and that follows the exact same logic as all the rest. So if I go, for example, take a look at the click or for the destroy or the set password, those are also in their corresponding base player controller character controller. But this is the show property manager. So here we are doing just some logic basically on to show a dialogue. One of the things that the kit has that I didn't fully appreciate was a full UI set of things like dialogues and inputs and things like that that are pretty easily reusable from this UI scene global. First time I've used it, so I'm kind of using that singleton dialogue object to drive some of this purchasing behavior. I may end up with my own class at the end of the day, my own UI class, inherit from UI base and that sort of thing, but this works for now. And the logic is pretty simple. If the building's already owned, we show you who the owner is. It's either you or the character name. If it's not owned, then we're going to check the price and see if you can afford it or not. If you can't afford it, we tell you you can't afford it. If you can't afford it, then we're going to show the dialogue with the yes or no purchase buttons enabled. If you select yes, then we start to do the server logic. So let's drill down there. So from the player character controller, we're now going into the player character building component. Again, this is a partial, just like the rest of it. We're not going to try to touch too much core here. And we're basically just seeing if you can interact, if they're close enough, and then we fire off the RPC. Here's all the server logic here. Here we're just getting we're trying to get the base building entity based on the object ID that's passed in. Get the price, check the distance. This is kind of all boilerplate. And here's all the custom logic now. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to walk through that building hierarchy and build up a list of all the parents from that child door, so it can go in level deep and it'll find them all. One thing it won't do yet is account for other children of those same parents, so that's marked as a to-do thing. Then it checks to see if there is an owner anywhere in that hierarchy. If there is, then we tell them we've got some invalid data because they shouldn't be able to buy something that is already purchased. We check your gold, and again send an error if there's not enough gold. Then finally we deduct the property price from the gold of the player, and we're going to set the entity ID and the character name. Pretty simple. One of the few hacks I had to do to core was to add in this custom send message UI text key. So I did have to edit the language CSS or language script, sorry, and add in this key so I could say the property was purchased. But that's basically all the components. If I come back in here and take a look, we looked at the UI current building, we looked at the player component property, character controller, that one we looked at, that one looked at. Yes, the door entity. So this is, I think, is going to end up being temporary. So everything's driven off that door, as I said. So I want to add some additional data to that door. So I've got a partial on top of the door. This did require a core hack because the door entity class is not set up for partial. So I had to make that change. But now I can extend what a door means. In this case, I've got the property price. I check to see if it's a property entrance or not. And we're storing that in that extra data, as I said, where we're stuffing the price in, and maybe we'll stuff some other things in there too. I may end up reverse engineering this at the end of the day and not driving it off a door entity. So one of the questions I have for anybody who's watching this is if you look at the scene, I've got this concept of maybe adding in signage, right? And so all of that property manager functionality, instead of being driven from the door itself, would be driven by selecting and interacting with the sign. And this would then allow me to create a brand new building entity, which would be just for the signage. Not quite sure what I would do for a building that is already purchased and owned. There probably would be a sign there. So if you have thoughts on that, let me know in the comments or something. So that's it for tonight. Have a good one. Bye.